Hi! Did you know that the Olympics in Helsinki were a turning point that turned the Games into an international power play? Hi, I'm Heidi, and in this video we are going to talk about the Olympics and why they changed in Helsinki. I'll explain how the Olympics shifted from amateur competition into a professional multi-million-dollar enterprise and why Helsinki played a key role in that change. The Olympic Games did not change suddenly. They did not change because of one rule, one athlete, or even one ideology. But in 1952, in Helsinki, several long-running developments converged for the first time in one place. This video explains why the Helsinki Olympics mark a turning point in Olympic history, not symbolically, but structurally. Helsinki 1952. The 1952 Summer Olympics took place from 19 July to 3rd of August. These Summer Olympics in Helsinki brought together 69 nations with 4,932 athletes competing in 149 events across 17 sports. This was a record level of participation in the post-war era and marked the first time the Soviet Union took part. The Soviet Union sent 295 athletes and competed in 18 sports. The Soviet sportsmen were supported by fully centralized state sports system, and this permanently altered how the Olympics worked. Amateurism before Helsinki. For most of the 20th century, the Olympic Games claimed something unusual. They insisted that the world's most prestigious athletic competition should be reserved for amateurs, athletes who did not earn money from sport and competed for honor and ideals. It was often justified by the references to the ancient Greece. Supporters of amateurism claimed that ancient Olympic athletes competed for glory, not money, and that sport was a part of a broader moral and educational ideal. Athletic excellence was linked to virtue, self-control, and balance between body and mind. But this historical reference was selective and unstable. In reality, in ancient Greece, athletes often received material rewards, pensions, and privileges. They were also financially supported by their city-states and could become wealthy and socially elevated through sport. Ancient sport was not amateur in the modern sense. It was embedded in systems of patronage, honor, and reward that simply did not map neatly onto 19th century ideas of unpaid competition. The modern amateur ideal was therefore not a revival of antiquity, but a reinterpretation shaped by modern social values. Nevertheless, this idea shaped the Olympics for more than half a century. This reinterpretation came largely from Pierre de Coubertin. Coubertin was a French aristocrat, educator, and social reformer working in late 19th century Europe. His central concern was not sport itself, but education and national character. Sport in his vision was a tool of moral education, a way to cultivate discipline and restraint, and an activity that was supposed to be pursued for its own sake. But this ideal contained an unspoken truth. Only those with economic security could afford to remain amateurs. In practice, amateurism favored the upper and upper middle classes and excluded workers whose physical skills were tied to their earnings. It punished those who could not afford to train without compensation. When the ideal became enforcement, the most infamous example of amateurism's rigidity is Jim Thorpe, who was a Native American. At the 1912 Stockholm Olympics, Thorpe won both the pentathlon and the decathlon, events designed to identify the most complete athlete of the Games. His performance was so dominant that the Swedish king publicly praised him as the greatest athlete in the world. But admiration offered no protection. Olympic officials later discovered that while still in college, Thorpe had played semi-professional baseball, earning $2 per game, roughly $68 in today's money. The amount was irrelevant. Under amateur rules, any payment at all invalidated eligibility. Thorpe was stripped of his medals and erased from the record. But he was not even an isolated case. At the time, also ski instructors or those who were teaching swimming as a profession were automatically excluded as well, because they were earning with their skills that they used in the competition. Pretty absurd, if you ask me. Amateurism in reality functioned as an enforcement system that favored the upper class, not a flexible ethical guideline. Paavo Nurmi and the limits of amateurism. Paavo Nurmi was not just a successful runner, he became a global figure and turned Finland into a sporting superpower. He participated in the Olympic Games 3 times and won 12 Olympic medals. He competed in the 1920 Summer Olympics in Antwerp, in 1924 in the Summer Olympics in Paris, and in 1928 at Summer Olympics in Amsterdam. Yet, Nurmi's career also exposes how amateurism worked in practice. Before the 1932 Los Angeles Olympics, Nurmi was ruled ineligible after authorities concluded that payments he received during international racing tours exceeded permissible travel reimbursements. According to the International Amateur Athletic Federation, Nurmi received fixed sums per race, and these were classified as profit, not as expenses, and therefore he was deemed as a professional. The distinction was narrow but still strictly enforced. An amateur could be reimbursed for the travel expenses, but he could not make any surplus. But the irony is that by this time, elite sports already required a lot of time for practice, international travel, organized training, and basically all that required some financial support. So the system just basically insisted on amateur purity while operating in a professional reality. The Cold War arrives in Helsinki. At the opening ceremony of the 1952 Helsinki Olympics, Paavo Nurmi lit the Olympic flame, which was a symbol of recognition of his place in Olympic history. After World War II, the contradiction became even more systematic, because when the Soviet Union entered the Olympic Games in 1952 for the first time in Helsinki, amateurism changed its meaning completely. Soviet athletes were amateurs in paper, but in practice they were state-funded and full-time athletes. In paper, they could be, for example, serving in the army or students, but this did not match the reality. The athletes still didn't earn any money when they won prizes at the Olympic Games, but they were paid to train for them. And more importantly, the sportsmen also became a tool of propaganda in the post-war world. The success of the Soviet sportsmen created a new reality that was criticized in the West, and to be able to compete with the Eastern Bloc, the West had to accept that athletes were paid, but still this was not officially recognized. Finland's position between systems. The fact that the Soviet Union participated for the first time in the Games organized in Helsinki was no coincidence. Geopolitically, Finland stood between East and West, formally democratic and independent, but constrained by proximity to the Soviet Union. This period is known as suomettumisen aika, Finlandization. Finland remained parliamentary democracy and maintained market economy, and it avoided formal alignment. But also at the same time, public criticism of the Soviet Union was limited. The Finnish politicians were afraid to criticize the Soviet Union because they still remembered very clearly the horrors of the war against the Soviet Union. And in Finland, many people were afraid that if Finland openly criticized what was happening in the Eastern Bloc, it could escalate into an armed conflict. That's why Finland's foreign policy prioritized stability. The 1952 Helsinki Olympics occurred at the beginning of this period of suomettuminen, or Finlandization. For Finland, hosting the Games served as proof of sovereignty, proof of competence, and also as a proof of neutrality. The Soviet Union's Olympic debut placed Finland in a delicate position. The Games had to succeed without aligning with either bloc, from amateurism to sponsorship. By 1952, amateurism had already been hollowed out by geopolitics, but it was money that completed the transition. From the 1960s onward, television transformed the Olympics into a mass media event, and sponsorship followed visibility. Sponsors required recognizable athletes and consistent performance, and basically this meant also full-time training. The Olympics generated vast revenue, and the sponsors received a lot of revenue by marketing through the sportsmen, but athletes were still expected to compete as amateurs. As an attempt to try to avoid the rules set by the International Olympic Committee, the hidden funding expanded and institutional workarounds became standard. By the 1980s, the International Olympic Committee formally began accepting professional athletes. By the early 1990s, professionalism was fully acknowledged. In Jim Thorpe's case, between 1982 and 1983, his medals were reinstated posthumously. Finnish elite athletes were supported through public funding, grants, and training systems, not as state employees, but through institutional support typical of a welfare state. So why did Helsinki matter in the context of the Olympics? The Olympics changed in Helsinki because multiple systems simply stopped aligning. In one place and in 1 year, amateur rules still basically remained, but still professional realities arrived, and it became way more inevitable that these two realities were clashing. No rule was abolished in Helsinki, and no official declaration was made. But after all, after the Helsinki Olympics, the old model no longer described reality, and also the Western countries were forced to see this and to accept gradual changes in who was able to participate in the Olympics. Do you think that there should be some worldwide competition for amateurs only still nowadays? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching!